Today on the Surviving the Human Experience podcast, we have a very special episode. We're going to be exploring the keys to unlocking your power to overcoming obstacles. We're blessed to have Keisha Bishop with us today to share her bounce back ability, BBA method, and the critical role BBA plays in assisting with the process of becoming the best version of yourself. So before we dive in, I'd like to share a little more about Keisha. She's a beautiful soul who I'm blessed to know on a personal level. She's an inspirational orator, most known as the mother of track and field Olympic medalist and American record holder, Noah Lyles. She's also the mother to professional Adidas athlete and world ranked Josephus Lyles. During her track career at Seton Hall University, Keisha became a 10-time NCAA All-American in track and field and a 9-time Big East Conference champion. As a life coach, Keisha creates customized one-on-one plans that empower and validate clients along their journey while creating space for manifesting one's destiny. So welcome to the show, Keisha.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. I like that intro. I'm like, ooh, that lady sounds cool.
She is. She is superwoman. She is doing it all. I love it. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation and providing listeners with some helpful tips and techniques to assisting in overcoming obstacles. Life has just become so increasingly fast-paced over the last, several decades. Many are living on autopilot. They're operating in survival mode. And it's left so many people, I would say, feeling defeated, deflated. A lot of people are putting their dreams aside, putting them back on the shelf. So I'm elated that you're here to share your bounce back ability method with our listeners. By the way, I could see that being a book. So I'm going to need you to, start writing that because that is a hot title. So I think you
That's,
got one there.
that's
Um,
funny you say that. I'm meeting with a book agent right now. So I'll take that
Wonderful.
into consideration.
Yes, I can see it. I can totally see that. That's an awesome. I can even envision the cover. So your message and methods are practical, they're motivating, and they're definitely tried and true. So we're going to get this party started. Want to start off by sharing that you have a vast background that spans across so many spaces. You're a child of God, or as you put it, God's favorite. You're a phenomenal woman, wife, mother, entrepreneur, momager, and life coach, just to name a few. I know you've got several more there. So you've experienced life's beauty and life's ups and downs. When you've been given lemons, you've made lemonade. And with each of those experiences, good, not so good, or indifferent, you've always managed to persevere and continue on your journey. So, getting into this now, most recently, you celebrated not one, but 2 Olympic medals with your son, Noah, in Paris. So, congratulations to that.
Thank you.
And you've been in the most public spaces and platforms. And then you come home and you weed your garden and you maintain a household, which I love. I saw that on social media the other day. I'm loving it because you're showing the reality of life. So let's start off by having you just take us on a little bit of a journey to learn a little bit more about who the woman is behind all of life's demands.
Okay, so I'm Keisha Bishop. I like to say I've had three identities. So I was born Keisha Kane in Southeast DC. I was always in those gifted and talented classes. I went to public school. I achieved a full scholarship to Seton Hall University, where I continued my track and field talents and had all those accolades that you mentioned. But I feel like that was a whole nother person. I always say that was my life BC, before children,
Love it.
and it sounds lighter. So this is a totally different body.
We've
Love
all
it.
been there.
It's healthy. I appreciate it, but that was a totally different body. So that was Keisha Kane. During that part of my life, I looked great on the outside. I was achieving a lot of, honor society accolades and being a gifted and talented. And I was All-American through Junior Olympics. And I looked really great on the outside, but on the inside, I was dealing with a lot of trauma that I didn't know how to process because I had been raped at 14 and got up the same day, went to track practice, and then went to the Junior Olympics like 3 weeks later. And then just being raised in the inner city and all of the things that come with being raised in the inner city. It was during the crack epidemic. You have friends who are selling drugs, you have friends who are being gunned down by drugs. And then going to high school up above Georgetown, DC, where your friends were the president of universities or politicians' children. So it was like living in two different dichotomies and trying to figure out how to navigate that while dealing with my own personal trauma. So that was Keisha Kane. After I graduated Seton Hall University, I got married to my college sweetheart, who was Kevin Lyles. So then I became Keisha Lyles or Keisha Kane Lyles. And I had 3 children in 2 years. And I say it is possible. It only takes 9 months.
You made it happen. Living proof.
Only takes 9 months. From there, we homeschooled our children. We were in a cult, which was crazy for 10 years. Didn't know that cults still existed. Didn't know the definition of a cult. So that's a whole nother story. And I was dealing with clinical depression on a personal level and overcame that. And then I got divorced 13 years later and eventually got remarried. And now I'm Keisha Kane Bishop. So I have 3 different parts of my life. So that's like the long answer to a very simple question.
Yes, no, I love it. I think it's important as guests are listening that they get an understanding of who we're talking to and the journey that we go on. I think it really sets the stage, and it's always awesome to know who people are behind the scenes. So thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable with your story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So bounce back ability has gotten some traction since you first introduced the concept. It's very catchy. I love it. I just feel like it's a song. Like I was ready. Sir Mix-a-Lot was playing, all the things started coming out in my head when I heard it. I'm like, BBA, not the BBL, the BBA. So anyways, for our listeners who are not familiar with what it is and they may be hearing the term for the first time, can you just kind of give us a little general idea of what bounce back ability is and where you came up with that method?
So it's funny, I didn't coin the phrase. I heard it and I don't remember where, but I think, knowing me, it was probably from Bishop T.D. Jakes because I listened to him a lot. And it was probably years ago. And I was like, I think I've got that bounce back ability. I've always been told I have resilience and the ability to overcome, and I'm resourceful. And I'm like, what are people talking about? I don't know what they're talking about because this is just who I am. And I thought everybody was like that, but I've learned that everybody is not like that. So what it is the ability to, no matter what life throws at you, to know I may be down right now, but I'm going to come out of it. And the best example I can give is when I was separated from my husband and my girlfriend called me and she said, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not okay, but I will be okay." And I said, "But right now, I'm not okay. My hair might not be done. I don't have on any makeup. My nails might not be done. And I don't look good, girl, but you best believe I will not be staying here." And so I think it's that mindset that says there are times in life when we are not okay, no matter who we are, Black, red, white, green, gay, straight, American, Asian, like life just throws, life be lifing. That's what I say.
Yes.
And it's the mindset to know I am not okay right now. I don't believe in toxic positivity where we're just going to pretend like everything's always okay. But I'm not going to stay here. This is not the end of my story. And to me, that is the bounce back ability.
Love it. Ooh, this is great. You're giving me chills. So you shared that it's an essential ingredient. How so? Why would you say that this is so important for all of us to embrace?
I think it's a mindset. So in that mindset, sometimes when we're down, we think of ourselves as a victim. But I like to think, even though we may be a victim, we can also be a victor. And what has been thrown at us, we can turn it around to not just help ourselves, but to help other people. But if we stay in that mindset, then we're never going to be able to overcome. We're never going to be able to achieve because this world is really hard. Life gets really hard. For instance, when my son broke the American record in the men's 200-meter dash, people saw us on screen and we were screaming and we were yelling and we were excited as a family. But that same day, my mother-in-law had gone into hospice that morning. And so that morning, we're at breakfast and my husband and I are crying. And I just think when people only see you in the spotlight or what I consider famous, I think I'm finally accepting the fact that I'm kind of well known.
Yeah, not kind of, you are. Embrace it and love it.
Yeah, it's a lot, but I'm finally accepting that. And I just think when people only see you in the spotlight, they think, oh, her life is great. Now, don't get me wrong. In my opinion, I'm the most blessed woman to ever live. But the reason I consider myself blessed is because I have amazing children. I have my health, I have my strength, I have a husband who adores me. I get to go for walks. Like, I even appreciate the fact, this might sound corny, that I can see colors. Like, I think colors are one of God's greatest gifts. And
Yes.
I get so excited that I can just see colors when I open my eyes. So I just appreciate a lot of the little things in life.
Mhm.
But having that mentality and being appreciative no matter where you are is so important to having bounce back. Because when you learn to have a heart of gratitude and you're just grateful, it
Mhm.
makes it makes life so much more fun
It
to do
does.
life, you
Yes.
know?
Totally agree. So then I think you kind of answered my next question, but I was going to ask you, do you think that bounce back ability is a universal method? So for those who are listening who may not be in that spotlight, is this something that the everyday person could apply to their life?
Yeah, because I'm an everyday person.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yes. So for
Yes,
all of
I'm
our listeners who are wondering, can they apply this to, does it work universally across the spectrum? It absolutely does.
Yes, I'm an everyday person. I just remember when I first got divorced and we were on food stamps and we had our light shut off and we had our water cut off and our cable cut off and just how we responded to it. So first the cable got cut off and I was working full time. That was the frustrating part.
Hmm.
I had a college degree, but since I had been a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, I had to start at entry level. And
Okay.
so I became the working poor. And
Hmm.
I remember when our cable got shut off, my kids were so cute. They were like, I said, guys, the cable got shut off. They were like, oh, mom, that's okay because we can watch TV on YouTube. I was like, you can? They were like, yeah, we're good. And then when I went to apply for food stamps, I was so ashamed. And I took my daughter with me because I forgot to drop off one of the papers. And I
Okay.
didn't want to take her with me because I was so ashamed. And my daughter goes, I think she was like 8 or 9. And she goes, what is this place? And I said, well, this is a place you come to when you need help buying food for your family. And she looked at me and she said, that is so nice of them. And so she just changed my whole mindset. And I got the best caseworker. She was like, girl, you should have been in here a long time ago. What were you?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, what were you doing? Just your mindset, it makes such a big difference. So the resources might be different depending on where
Mhm.
you live, depending on where you are in the world, but the mentality that we can figure this out and you become like the 5 people you hang around the most.
Yes.
So just remembering those principles, to me, yes, it can be applied worldwide.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So let's explore. You did touch on this in a few spaces, so maybe you want to elaborate a little bit, but let's explore how you used bounce back ability in your own life and the success you've seen in that arena. So could you maybe share a few examples with our listeners of how you've applied it to your own world?
Yeah, so one thing I did, I remember I got a really nice job. I love this job. I was doing social work at a Title I school. And for those who don't know, Title I schools are schools where the majority of the children qualify for food stamps. So I was working there. I loved my job, absolutely adored it. And I had just started. And so I was trying to hold out to the next paycheck to put gas in my car.
Mhm.
And payday came, and unfortunately, I ran out of gas on the way home from work. And my girl, I was stuck on the side of the road. It's snowing, but girl, I look cute. I had on my cute leather high heel boots and, and
I love it.
my skirt because I was
It's like
cute.
I got that bounce back ability. I'm looking good, not going anywhere, but I'm here.
That's right. So I was really blessed. One of my friends saw me on the side of the highway because she was bringing her kids home from school. She was like, what are you doing out here? So she's like, come on, we got to get you some gas. So I was telling another friend of mine who's a single mom, and she said, girl, don't you know if you have $1 in your bank account, you can fill your car up on gas because the machine only needs you to have $1, and then the gas station won't take the money out till 2 days later. Now, this was
Ooh, nice.
like 10 years ago, but it
Uh-huh.
probably is true.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I made it my goal. This is where how I've applied it. I was like, my goal is if I can not go in the negative in my bank account at least 2 days before payday, then I
Mhm.
can fill my car up to get me to payday, and then I'll be okay.
Yes.
Then my goal became if I could not go in the negative until one day before payday. And then my goal became to not go in a negative. And then my goal became if I could save $20 a paycheck. And then it was
Mhm.
$50 a paycheck. But since I had been an athlete, I understood long-term goals.
Mhm.
I understood that at the beginning of the track season, track practice sucks, your toenails fall off, you can't breathe, you feel like you're gonna die. But
Mhm.
if you just keep doing it every day consistently, then things get better. And so I took that same mentality from running track and I just applied it to life. So that's like an example. And then eventually I got better jobs and I was able to get into a place where I didn't need food stamps anymore. But it took years, it didn't happen overnight. I think it took me
Mhm.
about 3 years to really get on my feet. And to be honest with people, when I was struggling, and you'd be surprised in America, I feel like we have to present this image that we've always got it together. I was not about that. And so I'll be like, girl, I'm struggling. I can't afford to do that. That's not in my budget. And then some people will be like, oh, girl, I'm struggling too. Or some people will be like, oh, well, let me help you. Like your authenticity frees you
Mhm.
from the shame.
Yes. I love that. And it's so interesting how you share it was the little steps that you worked on that got you to the goals, that it's just making that tiny little change or setting that mini goal, for lack of better words, that will get you to that long range goal. I think oftentimes we try to approach the whole mountain instead of taking it in steps and just choosing to do that slowly. You start to see the progress, even if it's just getting through day one, right?
Yeah,
And getting to the next day. People that are struggling mentally or emotionally, just if you can get through each hour, right? And just keep going and keep pushing, that's that bounce back ability. I love it. Uh,
absolutely.
so you often connect with competitors in the professional athlete arena, and there's so many obstacles there. There's celebrations, there's disappointments, there's competition, all of that. So how have you applied or how have you seen the bounce back ability method applied with competitive athletes?
That is a really good question. I think the bounce back ability becomes tricky with competitive athletes because you're right. Personally, I was a competitive athlete. My ex-husband gold medaled and ran for Adidas for 3 years. And then now I have two children who are professional athletes, and I'm around professional athletes continually in the track and field space. Their journey can be out of balance a little bit, and that's one of my passions, is helping people stay in balance,
Mhm.
because as an athlete you are taught to push through pain, but there comes a time when pain can be sending you an important message. But since a lot of these athletes have been competing since they were little and they've always been taught to push through pain, then sometimes they apply it to the extreme. So what that looks like is physically they may have an injury, but they won't even mention they have an injury
Right.
because they think it'll make them sound weak,
Mhm.
and they don't want to say anything that makes them look weak. And then the
Mhm.
injury becomes you're missing a whole season.
Right.
Or they may be struggling emotionally. Like I
Mhm.
know athletes personally, and you would never know it. They're Olympians, they're world champions, they're medalists, they're professionals. And they will sit in the room in the dark crying the day of competition because their anxiety is so high. Or
Mhm.
they will go and disappear if they don't perform well because they are so ashamed. And so, what the body is telling them is that you need to address the anxiety, you need to slow down and address this injury. But because they've been taught to push forward so much and ignore the body to get better,
Mhm.
they miss the lesson on balance. And so that
Mm.
breaks my heart. So, in the professional athlete space, I think that, or in the competitive space, I think that's something that still needs to be taught. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
You sure did. You sure
Oh,
did. Because I was going to ask you, where is that opportunity where you could have bounce back ability introduced into that space?
so a lot of times it's through overcoming injuries, it's through overcoming emotional trauma. Because what people don't realize is that a lot of times athletes become athletes because they are literally running from something else. So
Mm,
they could be running from low self-esteem, they could be running from poverty, they could be running from domestic violence.
yeah.
For me, it was running from the trauma of being raped. Like, if I can be good enough on the track, then I can forget about my trauma back there.
Yeah.
And that works until it doesn't work.
Till it doesn't. Makes
And
sense.
and I think that's what the movie Encanto told us. I love that
Yes.
movie.
Yes,
Because
it is. It's a beautiful movie.
the generational trauma that Abuela experienced helped her to build this beautiful family that was a pillar in the community. But because she did not heal from her trauma, she put so much pressure on her children and her grandchildren that their trauma didn't look like hers, but it was still trauma.
Yes. Yeah. And that
And
energy, it flows. I think a lot of times people don't realize, your ancestral line,
uh,
just it goes with you, right? And so as you're birthing that baby, as the mama's doing that, you're passing energy from generation to generation. And until somebody stops and does the work, you keep repeating the cycles. It's going to look a little different with each person. But the core of it, when you strip it down, can be so raw, and it's so consistent for sure.
you're so right. And can I just piggyback on that?
Absolutely.
They've done studies. Resma Mannequin is a trauma therapist who I adore. And he said epigenetics have done studies that show trauma literally will reconstruct your DNA,
Yes.
and it gets passed down for up to 14 generations. So if you figure a generation is 20 years and 14 times 20 is 480, then you take the year, what year is this? 2024, subtract it from 480, you're in the 1700s. And if you think about everything that was going on worldwide in the
Mhm.
1700s with the colonization that was being done by the Portuguese and the Dutch and the British and the French, and how that affected the whole world, like all of that trauma, plus our everyday trauma of work and car accidents and hurricanes and all of that, we all have trauma.
We
How does
do.
it show up? So for
Yes.
my family, it shows up because we were all taught to keep cash money in your house. And I thought everybody was taught that. And so I taught my kids that in case of an emergency, you want to have cash in your house. My
Right.
parents taught me that. Their aunts and uncles taught them, their children out to my cousin. And then I finally sat down, like, why do we do that? Because I found out every family doesn't do that. They looked at me like I
Right.
was crazy. Like, what do you mean I need to keep cash money in my house? And I'm
Right.
like, well, everybody does that in case of an emergency. And I realized it started with my grandmother because she was raised in the Great Depression.
Hmm.
She started keeping cash in her house. And then she
Yes.
taught her children, and they taught their children, and they taught their children. So here we are almost 100 years later. That is a physical manifestation of the generational trauma being passed down.
Yes. And it's funny, that's same on this side too. My grandparents went through the Great Depression. And so it was the combination of money in the house and food, always cooking extra because they were always so worried that there wouldn't be enough food. And then I saw that go through my mom's family, and then it went through mine. And then I'm like, no wonder why we're always looking like we'll never starve. Because we
But you
were
want to
always
know
so
what's
worried
crazy?
there'd not be food.
Long time ago, I think like maybe 200 or 300 years ago, fuller figured women, I'll say that,
Yes.
were they were idolized, even in
Yes.
pain, because they weren't hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And now the
Yes.
pendulum has shifted. It's all about balance, girl. We got to get
It is.
balanced.
We need balance and connecting with self and loving yourself, right? Because we're not necessarily us, but just people in general. It's human behavior to look at others and measure up. Same thing with the athletes, right? Everybody's trying to measure themselves against somebody or something else. But if we could just stop for a second and be thankful and grateful, just as you mentioned in the beginning, for all that we have and all that we are. We're uniquely designed to look the way we do on purpose. There's a reason for it. And
I
so
love
I think that's
that.
the hardest, lesson to learn as you go through this journey, because we're socially conditioned to look at different things. You look at magazines, even as a kid growing up, you're looking at Barbie and you're like, oh, wow, she's so perfectly proportioned. How come all my parts aren't? Yes.
I
Oh my
keep my
gosh.
Barbie on
Is that
my
peaches and cream?
my kids bought it for me for my birthday. It's my favorite Barbie. Barbie is on my desk.
Peaches and cream was my favorite Barbie growing
Really?
up. Yes. Yes. I had two of them because I was worried the first one was going to get broken or ruined. So I had to have a backup just in case.
I love this.
I absolutely loved her. And I used to pull all my Barbies out. I had the Wet and Wild set, so I had the pool set going on, and I mean, just all the things. But I can remember growing up and struggling with that image piece, because you'd compare yourself to others. And then, I did soccer and cheerleading, so we were in the cheerleading arena. It was all about looking perfect and having the body. But it's so interesting to see that generationally that stuff flows. And when you look at the generation, for example, when my grandparents grew up in the 20s, women had to look a certain way and they were doing all kinds of crazy things. You got to my mom's generation, and she remembered and reminisced about how her mother had her on diet pills when she was just a young child, because you can't gain weight and you can't look a certain way, because how do you get a husband? Right.
Oh,
So to think about that, I'm like, where were those fuller figure days? I would have thrived there. Why did we get dropped on the earth during the skinny girl world, right? So it is very interesting, but yeah, that generational trauma and applying bounce back ability there is huge. Absolutely. Love it.
yeah.
That was a great detour. I love it. So I know, I always think we're going in one direction and we jump in others because the conversation just flows. So I'm going to switch a little bit over onto your entrepreneurial side and your life coach side.
Okay.
So as an entrepreneur and life coach, you work with clients across so many different walks of life. And they're usually typically seeking services for a very specific reason. I'm sure many of them probably, if you strip it down, it's because they're trying to overcome some type of obstacle, whether they realize it or not. So, do you realize or do you notice any recurring themes or patterns with your clients when it comes to overcoming their obstacles?
I do. And as a life coach, let me just explain the difference between a life coach and a therapist, because some people don't know. So a therapist is therapy is clinical, and it is definitely a more how do I say it? It's a clinical approach to healing from past trauma. Life coaching is looking where you are right now. You tell me where you're trying to get to, and then we figure out how to get you there. But in doing that, we have to study your previous patterns of behavior. And so we get into generational trauma because we have to figure out, well, why do you do this? You
Right.
know, I've worked with women who are, I've worked before with a woman who was a multimillionaire, and she works herself to the bone, where she will sit at her laptop for 16, 18 hours a day,
Mhm.
which means she's not working out, she's not eating well, she's not getting enough rest. But we learned that that was what she saw her mother did, and her grandmother and her great grandmother, because
Mhm.
they were so poor growing up. So it's like your brain didn't get the message that you don't live like that any longer. And so
Right.
she's still operating out of generational trauma. So I see a lot of generational trauma as a theme, and I also see a lot of burnout.
Mhm.
And that comes because we're not resting. And I teach
Mm.
people rest is not sleep. Rest is short for restoration. And there are
Mhm.
7 different types of rest that our body requires. And I learned that from Dr. Dalton Smith, who has a wonderful TED Talk. And we need sensory rest, we need physical rest, mental rest, creative rest, social rest, and I forget the other 2, but you can look it up. But basically, it's saying we can't be constantly bombarded with doing social events every weekend, because you're going to get worn out. Sometimes you just need to be a human being and not a human doing. And I
Mhm.
think we do too much doing and not enough being. So what I've
Mhm.
learned to do and what I teach people to do is get hobbies. Like gardening. There's actually healing properties in getting your hands in the dirt and grounding. I
Mm-hmm.
teach them to go for walks. I teach them to do yoga, like really get in touch with your body. That is a theme I see a lot. We are so out of touch with our body because if we were a child and a child wants desperately to be loved by their parents, and they'll do anything to do that. And in doing so, if they're not in an emotionally healthy environment, for whatever reason, sometimes the
Mm-hmm.
parent might have cancer, sometimes the parent doesn't even know.
Right.
Um, so I'm not saying that it's a bad parent thing. For
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, when the child wants to do anything to be loved by the parent, they'll figure out who they need to become to be loved by that parent. And in
Yes.
doing so, they are totally neglecting their own needs
Mm-hmm.
and get used to neglecting your own needs and your own body. So yoga helps you get back in touch with your body. So I just teach people how to rest and notice their patterns of behavior and then
Mm-hmm.
go, okay, now that we know that, what are we going to do moving forward differently?
Right. Yeah, it's that disassociation that's happened.
Yeah.
It's almost like we've gone from the spectrum of self-love to, I don't like to use the word hate, but almost like a self-hate. We're abusing our bodies and I call it self-abuse. You know, we usually think abuse comes from outside of us, but when we actually look at it, depriving ourselves of sleep is a form of abuse.
Yeah.
Depriving ourselves of nutrition is a form of abuse. Depriving yourself of fresh air and touching nature, it's a form of abuse. Those are like core tenets that need to be part of your life and your lifestyle. Not to mention we tend, especially women, we tend to give to everybody around us, right? And so our cup ends up so empty. It's like there's not even a drop at the bottom because you've given to your kids, your spouse, your significant other, your pets, your mother, your brother, whatever it is. You're giving, 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 but what are you doing to replenish you? What are you doing to take care of you? God's vessel. Where are you pouring into?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I I love that. I have a little video I share with my clients by Iyanla Van Zant, and she says, "What's in the cup is for you. What spills out onto the saucer is for everybody else."
I
And I
love
love
that.
that. And if you're giving from what's supposed to be in the cup, you're making other people a thief, and they don't even know it. You
Yes,
have to keep your cup full.
yes. And you know, we have to be careful. Like somebody said this to me years ago. I can't even remember who, but said, be careful what you get people used to. So when you've been doing that for so long and then you change. So let's say your client comes to you and you're coaching them and you're like, hold on, we're going to learn boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the lesson that you're teaching is the boundaries. And all of a sudden they place these boundaries, people get upset. And
They
so,
do.
how do you incorporate bounce back ability there when people have been used to something and then all of a sudden you notice when I've done this before, you ask God, God, please remove all of the people that don't belong in my space, that aren't serving my purpose or serving my higher purpose. And then I looked around and I was like, where did everybody go? They all disappeared. Let me go get my pets, right? So how do you work with clients through that part of the bounce back ability? Because that can spark a lot. That can spark sadness, depression, anger, frustration, confusion. So what do you do there?
So a couple of things. Sometimes when I'm working with people, I know that they need a therapist and I'm very honest with them. I tell them, you're getting into therapy. I'm not a therapist. I can recommend you a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But some people just don't feel comfortable working with a therapist. So I try to be as open and honest and stay in my lane with coaching. That's one thing. Sometimes I refer them to the therapist. Sometimes they have a therapist and we will do a three-way with the
Mm,
therapist, myself, and them to
I
make sure
love
that
that.
same page and we are creating a treatment plan that is the best for them. Sometimes the client disappears because growing is not easy. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I think my son Noah Lyles, he says that really well. Like he went from the 200 meters to the 100, and he
Mm-hmm.
said he had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We don't like to be uncomfortable as humans.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're willing to learn to be uncomfortable for the growth process, then the sky is the limit. It's like when a baby is learning how to walk, they keep falling and falling and falling. But the baby never says, forget it, I'm never gonna learn how to walk.
Right.
They
They
never
don't
say,
have all those conditions on them. They don't
yes,
have all of that life experience that tells them like people are watching, they see
yeah,
you fall. They
yeah,
don't care.
yes. They're like, I'm gonna get it. And they're
Yeah.
drooling when they're
Yes.
teething.
Yes. All of it. I love it. Yes.
Yeah, so we have got to get some of that back. I'm going to be comfortable with does this hurt? Yes. Does it suck? Yes. But you know what? We can do hard things.
Hmm.
We do hard things.
Yes.
We're not afraid of hard things. And when you get that mindset, it makes a difference. So one of the themes I come across constantly are lack of boundaries,
Mhm.
generational trauma, and lack of rest. Those are the
Mm,
that I noticed. And I had never thought of that question before. So that was a great
yeah.
question.
Oh, good. So here's the thing that's so interesting because when you point those three things out, and I love that you're doing threes because spiritual numbers, I'm here for it. And threes are 333, and everything you do has been in three that you've shared. Um, what's interesting is that lack of rest, that lack of boundaries, that generational trauma. Throw that perfect storm together, and you've created the perfect culmination for physical and health crisis in the body. Because once you've had the trauma that's unaddressed, now you've got trapped energy everywhere. Your energy's not flowing, so your organs and functions are not flowing well. You deprive your body of rest. How's your immune system functioning?
Mm,
Right. And so when you go through and you think of all of that and you just put that culmination together, like you just gave me such a huge aha moment. I'm like, makes so much sense because how can your body withstand that? Your physical, you've got your soul, but you've got your physical that's kind of like your outfit that you're putting over your soul. And now,
yeah.
if you've got all those things happening and you're not addressing and you don't have the boundaries and you don't have the balance, how can you operate at maximum capacity? You can't,
Wow. Girl,
right?
you are preaching. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you
I
just
know
gave me,
you're
I'm like, hold
absolutely right. You're so right. And I'm even thinking while you're talking, sleep is so important. Rest that they say that if so in our sport in track and field, we have certain things called performance enhancers.
on.
And sometimes
Mhm.
people take them illegally to try to get
Right.
faster. Sleep is one of the most powerful performance enhancers you can ever do because we don't realize we take it for granted. But when you sleep, your brain does a toxic dump. When you sleep, they've even shown that you can lose weight while you're sleeping. When you sleep, your body is restoring. So if you are not getting the adequate amount of sleep, that's a problem. And how many times have you seen people at work around the water cooler going, oh, I only got 5 hours sleep last night. Well, I only got 4 hours. It's like a competition. It's like,
It
this is
is.
toxic.
I
What are
can operate off of two. Like, well, get the medal for you, right? And how many energy drinks have you drank today? Just asking.
you?
And what did you amp up on? How many cups of coffee did you have to be able to get through the day? And it's interesting because when you do that, you start to burn out your adrenal system. You start to burn out all of the important things that are happening in your body and you don't even realize it. You just, like you said, you think it's a competition. It's like, I've achieved this ability to be
Yeah,
superhuman and function with no sleep. That's not good.
it's not
So
good.
that's one of the hardest things I've had to learn and incorporate in my world. And I could remember because I'm a go, 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 go. Multitask, as they said to me, many friends have said, you multitask within an inch of your life. And at one point, I thought that was great. I'm like, well, yeah, like there's a lot of stuff to do. What are you supposed to do? You can't just do things sitting still. And you realize, just like you shared, you're running away from the trauma. So if you stay busy, you never have to process. You don't have to sit with yourself. You don't have to address your emotions. You don't have to address anything. And then if you run fast enough, sort of like you mentioned with the track running, if you run fast enough, you'll just collapse. So you'll actually get to sleep without having to really put any thought into going to sleep or being all stressed out. I loved Sean Stevenson's book, Sleep Smarter. That was one that I really enjoyed. And he broke down the importance of sleep and shared so much that just made me say, okay, I got to prioritize this. And then you start to do that and learning how it's really good to disconnect an hour before bed, put your phone away, turn the lights down in the house, because getting that circadian rhythm in place so that your body knows, okay, I'm going to get on a regular sleep schedule. This is the time of night I should expect, and not scroll on your phone before bed, because you're activating everything in your brain. And when you're doing that, now you're not giving yourself restful sleep. So not just sleep being important, but the quality of it and allowing that body to relax so it actually benefits from it was probably one of the harder lessons I've had to learn. I'm
Yeah,
still working on it.
learning that lesson. TikTok is my bedtime story because I love
Okay,
to
I love
laugh.
it.
And my husband's like, "What are you laughing at?" I'm like, so
Mm-hmm.
I feel guilty. So I don't want people to think that I've got it all figured out
Yeah.
because I don't. I'm still a work in progress. So I'm just going to share and be transparent that I'm
Mm-hmm.
still working on that
Yes.
part
Yes.
of it. But you're right about multitasking because being a workaholic is actually an addiction.
Yes,
Because
it is.
addiction is anything that takes your mind off what you really need to heal from and process. And so
Yes.
when you're constantly go, 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 working, 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 then you don't have to take the time to listen to your body. Even
Mm-hmm.
something as simple as not stopping for lunch or
Yes.
not allowing your body to go to the bathroom. You're ignoring the needs of your body. You're disassociating. So
Yes.
a lot of people don't realize it. Because I don't have any addictions. That's what I used to tell my husband. I don't drink coffee. I've never done drugs. I didn't drink my first drink till I was 35. I was so boring. But I was an athlete.
That's okay.
And my husband was like, "You're a workaholic." And I was like, that is my addiction. So we all have these addictions we do to get through life and the
Yes.
world.
Yes.
So in our Western society, we work ourselves to death. I know
Mm-hmm.
I travel a lot, and in Europe, they always say Americans work too hard.
Mm-hmm. We do. We do. And we pride ourselves on it, which is the
Yeah,
most interesting part of the whole thing.
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Such a weird thing. Oh my gosh. So you shared some stories about your clients. Do you have any other profound stories that you can share with our listeners where you applied bounce back ability and you saw somebody's total transformation right in front of your eyes? You don't have to use names. We want to keep everybody's, confidentiality, but any little story you could share to show that this is real, it can happen, folks.
Yeah, I had a young woman who was a professional, and she was a giver, big time giver. And she was like the first college graduate in her household. And because she was the first college graduate, I believe she had survivor's remorse or survivor's guilt. So her family would constantly pull on her and they would call her for money and they would call her to help babysit and they would call her like she was supposed to solve all the family's problems.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so burnt out and she was so young. She was like in her late 20s. As a result, she got stuck in becoming a people pleaser for her family, but also becoming a people pleaser on her job. And because
Mm-hmm.
of that, it stopped her from advancing in life. And so I was able to help her notice the patterns of behavior because she would be on this emotional roller coaster with her job and with her family, where she felt guilty, where she loved her job, she loved her family. Then a crisis would happen. She would be expected to step in. She would solve the crisis. They would use her resources and her gift, drain her emotionally, and then move along and then use her again. Instead of preparing themselves or learning to become more independent as adults, because she was the youngest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so she was just emotionally drained. So I started pointing this out to her. And in the beginning, it was so hard because she felt like she was being mean. And
Right.
I said, you're not being mean, you're being an enabler. So I had to teach
Mm-hmm.
her the difference between enabling and setting boundaries and being a people pleaser. And then sometimes being there to help people because we all
Mm-hmm.
need. But in her journey, which took years, but in her journey to change her pattern of behavior, she ended up moving up in her company. She ended up purchasing a home. She
Nice.
ended up getting a dog, which she adored,
Oh.
and getting out of a relationship that wasn't serving her. And
Mm.
so she's so much happier now. And we don't work together anymore, but I do keep in touch with her and I do see her because as a life coach, I'm like, I'm not here to just be here. It's not
Right.
codependent.
Right.
What to be
Right.
codependent?
Yeah.
So I was happy for her. Very happy.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and that's the power. That's the beauty. You're empowering individuals to take their power back. Is
Yes.
really what you're doing. You're helping them get there because you know, patterns and behaviors, they become so normal. And just as you were sharing, like when you're addressing that with her, it's a delicate space because you've got to walk carefully because some people are more receptive than others. Some people are like, hey, I'm not. How dare you tell me, right? But then
Yeah.
others that are really ready to do the work say, huh, there might be something there. And they might need to really think about it for a minute and go back and be like, all right, maybe what she said was true. Maybe I need to let me journal about this a little bit and unpeel the onion a little bit. Um, but wow, oh, that's so awesome. It's always so beautiful when you get to see somebody flourish and grow, right? Because sometimes people do and other times it's too much, but that uncomfortable that you talked about earlier is so important because that's where the lessons are. The uncomfortable is where we grow and we discover who we truly are and we go back to who we truly are and who we came here to be that we've forgotten when we landed on earth. So
Yeah,
very
I think you're so right. And mental health plays such an important part in that. And
Mhm.
sometimes I heard Vince McMahon again to quote him. He said, when we look at people, don't look at them and say what's wrong with them. Look at them and say what happened to them. And
Yes.
it affords you to give them more grace. Not saying
Mhm.
you should tolerate abuse, because I'm never
Absolutely.
abuse. But if
Mhm.
you can figure out what happened to a person, then the story starts to make sense.
Yeah. And it's so true. I've shared a lot with clients as well that when somebody's acting a certain way towards you, this was a hard thing for me to learn. Try not to take it personal. That it's like, well, what trauma have they not addressed or worked with that they're projecting outward on somebody else? So it happens a lot. It can happen in the traffic that you're driving in. Somebody like freaks
Oh,
out because oh my gosh, somebody got cut off accidentally. You went into a lane and there was a car there, and then you've got a whole situation on the road, and it's like, what's going on over there? Like it was an accident, didn't mean to do it. People are living from their own lens, from their own experiences, and the person you're interacting with is either actively working on themselves or they've just accepted who and what and all the experiences that have happened to them, and they're living through that. So it's hard to separate, but it is a really important thing to recognize that just because you have an exchange with somebody doesn't mean you have any ownership or, they're projecting a lot of times. People project.
they do. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I know I've learned a lot about that through social media. I know my family, my son, his girlfriend, and sometimes even myself, after we were on the Netflix show Sprint,
Mhm.
and as we became more known, we
Mhm.
get a lot of hate through social media. And so many people call me that know me. They're like, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with them talking about your son or yourself or or his girlfriend like this? And so I think Kirk Franklin said it very well when he said, some people are so miserable that the only way they can find joy is to try to tear you down, because that is the little bit of happiness they can get in life,
Mhm.
which
Yes.
is so sad because they're not dealing with their own trauma. Uh,
Mhm.
I understand people disagreeing. What I don't understand is hate. What I don't understand is evil. And so one thing that I had to learn in life, and you can't do this so much with social media, but you can do it with your circle, is it is an honor and a privilege for me to allow someone to do life with me.
Yes.
So everyone doesn't get to do life with me. If you have
Yes.
shown that you are toxic, and I have told you again and again and again, and yet you refuse to do anything to change it, if I continue to allow you into my life, I am teaching you how to abuse me.
Yes. I love that. I
So
love
it's
that.
so important that we realize the healthier we become emotionally,
Mhm.
and we're all on a journey and we're all not
Mhm.
at the same place. And I get that. But if someone is am I saying that right?
Yes.
Proverbially or metaphorically punching you in your face over and over and over and not doing anything to stop it, professionally doing something to stop it and get help,
Mhm.
it would be insanity to continue standing there and letting them punch you over and over and over. You
Yes.
wouldn't do that. So don't
Yes.
do that emotionally either.
Yes. Yeah, we're all here on a mission. And if we understand our purpose, then we know that that type of behavior is impeding us from our mission. And so, as quickly as we can remove those people, we can get back to what God has called us to do because those are
Yeah.
distractions. Yeah, those are
Yes, I love
distractions.
that. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. I just
yeah,
told my daughter that. Those
yeah,
are distractions. And the sad part is it can be from anywhere. It can be in the church, it can be
mhm,
in your own family, it can be on your job. It
yes.
is so rampant nowadays.
Hmm.
You're absolutely right. Those are distractions. Because if I'm hurt and I'm trying to heal, I can't figure
Yes,
out how to be my best self because I'm
yes,
just hurting.
yes. And if you get sucked into the nonsense, it serves no purpose. I was watching, and I really think the whole social media conversation could be a whole episode in itself. So we'll have to come back and do that another time. But as I too was looking at comments, I kept looking and I said, okay, you can get caught up in what people are saying and you can angry type back and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't even know me. But it's a distraction. And then that person is winning that game that they're running on you. It's like it's not worthy of your attention. So knowing what is, going to serve your purpose and what's worthy of your attention is super key because if not, you're going to get sucked in, you're going to get pulled. And the devil is doing that on purpose to see if you can be distracted from your mission. So I love that you just kind of take that approach of, yep, just going to close this. I'm not even going to go there. It's not even worth my time because that's energy and time that you could be out here inspiring somebody else, sharing your story and your journey, and contributing positively while you're here on earth. So I love that you're not getting caught up in that foolishness. That's beautiful. Well,
Thank
we're
you.
coming to the end. So before we kind of wrap up, I would like to give you the opportunity to share what is your one message you have for our listeners?
Hmm. I have so many
Yeah.
messages.
You can share multiple if you'd like.
Oh, this is so
I'm
much
going to give you the floor is yours. I always love for my guests to share their message with the world. What would that be? What would it look like?
I think my message to the world is you are so amazing. And you're the apple of God's eye and you're God's favorite and God delights in you. And we all have trauma and we all have to get healed from it, but be willing to do the hard work. Because when we do the hard work, then the next generation doesn't have to work as hard in the next generation. Because if we think about things generationally and not just ego, I,
Yes.
it shifts your whole mindset. And then as you learn, then figure out who else wants to learn and take them along the journey with you. And I think that is what makes life so exciting and so beautiful. And then we can drown out the haters and we can drown out the toxic people. And hopefully, it reminds me of what Dr. King said. He said, it's not the hate of my enemies that disappoints me the most, it's the silence of good people. So hopefully, then the good people, the ones who are like, I love you no matter what religion you are. I adore you no matter what your sexual orientation is. You're still special to me because you have a beautiful heart and you're growing. I think if we can learn more of that message, and you might not agree with everything they do,
Right.
you can still try to understand and love them as long as they're willing to keep growing.
That was beautiful. I love that. Oh, you almost got
You
me in
like
tears over here.
it?
It's just so powerful because that's what it's all about. It's finding our way back to love. We're so far from that, from loving one another. And so yes, that was beautiful. All right. So please share with our listeners how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more about you or if they'd like to, work with you as a coach. How do they find you?
So a couple of ways. I have a website called bishoplifecoaching.net, and you can contact me on the contact page there. I'm also on social media. I am on Instagram under Keisha, Keisha underscore Kane, spelled Caine underscore Bishop. And then I'm also the president of the Lyles Brothers Sports Foundation, and we have Instagram on there under Lyles Brothers, S as in Sam, F as in Frank. So yeah, that's how you can contact me and see if there's anything I can do to help you become the best version of yourself.
Perfect. Well, thank you for taking your time with us today. We appreciate all of the wisdom you've shared with us. And for our listeners, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this episode of Surviving the Human Experience. And until next time, be well and stay blessed.